Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Imagine finding out your neighbors have been paying hundreds of dollars to use a pool they were never allowed to enter because one woman convinced them it was official. I didn't confront her right away. I paid her. Then I asked for something in writing. And the second she signed it, the entire game changed. I never thought I'd become a landlord. It wasn't part of any grand plan, but when my grandmother passed away and left me a decent inheritance, I decided to invest it in something tangible. After months of looking, I found a 12-unit apartment building in a decent neighborhood. The price was right, the units were well maintained, and the rental income would cover the mortgage with some left over. I closed on the property in March and decided to move into one of the vacant units myself. Here's the thing though, I didn't tell anyone I was the owner. I hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations, collect rent, deal with maintenance requests, all of it. As far as my neighbors knew, I was just another tenant. I had my reasons for keeping quiet. I wanted to experience what it was like to actually live in the building without people treating me differently or constantly bothering me with complaints they should be directing to management. I wanted to know what my tenants were really experiencing. The building itself was pretty basic, nothing fancy but clean and well kept. 12 units total, spread across 3 floors with a small parking lot and a laundry room in the basement. No pool, no gym, no real amenities to speak of. The rent was reasonable for the area, which is probably why I had good tenants and a low vacancy rate. Right next door, literally sharing a property line with my building, was another apartment complex. This one was bigger, about 20 units I'd guess, and had actual amenities. They had a proper gym, a decent-sized pool, and what looked like a community room with big windows facing the street. Their building was newer than mine and clearly catered to tenants willing to pay a bit more for those extras. I'd been living in my unit for about 2 weeks when I met Karen. It was a Saturday morning and I was carrying groceries up to my second-floor apartment when she intercepted me in the parking lot. She was probably in her late 40s with that particular kind of confidence that comes from someone who thinks they're more important than they actually are. She was wearing expensive-looking workout clothes and had her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "Excuse me," she called out, walking over from the direction of the other building. "Are you new here?" I set down my grocery bags and introduced myself, keeping it simple. Just told her my first name and that I'd moved in recently. "Perfect timing then," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wanted to catch you before you got too settled in. I live next door and I'm sure you've noticed we have a pool and gym facility." I nodded. It was pretty hard to miss. She launched into this whole speech about how the two properties had an understanding, and that residents of my building could use their pool and gym for a small monthly fee. She made it sound very official, like it was some kind of established arrangement that had been in place for years. She even had paperwork, well, a handwritten note on what looked like personal stationery, explaining the terms. The amount she wanted was not insignificant. She was asking for $75 a month per person. When I hesitated, she quickly added that it was a really good deal considering gym memberships in the area cost about the same, and this included pool access. She said several of my neighbors were already participating and seemed very happy with the arrangement. Something about the whole interaction felt off. The way she presented it was polished, like she'd given this speech before, but there was something in her eyes that made me suspicious. Also, if this was such an official arrangement, why was she collecting cash? Why wasn't it going through the management company? Why was she coming to me directly instead of this being part of my lease or mentioned during move-in? I told her I'd think about it and needed to check my budget. She seemed annoyed by this but tried to hide it. She said she'd come back in a few days to see if I'd made a decision, then walked back toward her building. As soon as I got inside, I pulled out my phone and started investigating. I called the property management company I'd hired and asked them about any arrangements with the neighboring building regarding pool or gym access. The woman on the phone had no idea what I was talking about. She checked the files for my building and confirmed there was no such arrangement, had never been any such arrangement, and that she'd never heard of anything like that. Then I did something that probably wasn't entirely appropriate from a privacy standpoint, but I was the building owner and I wanted to know if my tenants were being scammed. I asked the property manager to discreetly reach out to the current tenants and ask if anyone had been approached about paying for pool access next door. What she found out made my blood boil. Out of the 11 occupied units, excluding mine, 5 tenants reported that they'd been paying a woman from the next building $75 a month for authorized pool access. They'd been doing this for varying lengths of time. The longest had been paying for over a year. They all had the same story. A woman approached them, made it sound official, collected cash, and gave them handwritten receipts. I did the math. If she'd been collecting $75 a month from 5 units for a year, that was over $4,000, and those were just the current tenants I could confirm. Who knows how long this had been going on or how many previous tenants had paid. I needed to confirm one more thing. I called the management company for Karen's building. I didn't identify myself as a property owner, just posed as someone interested in their pool facilities. I asked if there was any arrangement where residents from neighboring buildings could pay a fee for access. The person I spoke with was very clear. Absolutely not. Their amenities were exclusively for their residents. Anyone caught giving access to non-residents would be violating their lease terms. So Karen wasn't just collecting money under false pretenses, she was actively violating her own lease by giving people access to facilities they weren't supposed to use. This wasn't a gray area or a misunderstanding, this was straight up fraud. A few days later, Karen came by again looking for her money. I was ready for her. I answered the door with a friendly smile and told her I'd decided to take her up on the offer. But I had a request. Since I was paying good money, I wanted an official agreement in writing that proved I had authorized access to the pool. She hesitated, but I insisted. I said I was concerned about liability issues and wanted documentation. She clearly didn't like this, but she must have figured losing out on $75 wasn't worth the argument. She wrote up a more detailed note on her personal letterhead, stating that she had authorized me as a representative of the building management to grant pool access for a fee, and that I was a paying participant in this program. I asked her to sign it and include her unit number and the date. She did, probably thinking I was just being overly careful. What she didn't realize was that I now had written proof of her scam operation, proof that showed she was claiming to represent building management when she had no such authority. I handed her $75 in cash, thanked her warmly, and told her I looked forward to using the pool. She seemed pleased with herself and told me pool hours were posted on their website and to just act like I belonged. She actually said that, just act like you belong. The next day, I took that signed document to the management company of her complex. I called ahead and asked to speak with someone about a lease violation in their building. When I arrived, I brought my documentation showing I owned the building next door, along with Karen's signed statement and all the information my property manager had gathered about the other tenants she'd scammed. The property manager who met with me was a tired-looking guy in his 50s named Richard. When I laid out everything I'd discovered, his expression shifted from confused to angry to resigned in the span of about 30 seconds. "Karen," he said, shaking his head. "Of course it's Karen." Apparently she was already on their radar for other issues. She was 3 months behind on rent, and they'd been preparing to start eviction proceedings. But this new information, written proof that she was running an unauthorized business, misrepresenting herself as acting on behalf of building management, and giving unauthorized access to their facilities, this escalated things significantly. Richard thanked me for bringing this to their attention and said they'd handle it from there. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned something that caught my attention. He said the owner of their building had been thinking about selling. The property was profitable, but the owner was getting older and tired of dealing with problem tenants like Karen. He'd been quietly testing the market to see if there was any interest. I asked Richard if he could put me in touch with the owner. He seemed surprised, but said he'd pass along my information. 2 days later, I got a call from the owner, a man named Frank, who'd owned the property for almost 20 years. We met for coffee, and he explained his situation. He was in his 70s, his wife had passed away a few years ago, and he was ready to simplify his life. The building was in good shape structurally and the rental income was solid, but dealing with tenant issues and property management had become exhausting for him. I asked him what he wanted for it. The price was significantly higher than what I'd paid for my building. We were talking about a property more than double the size with amenities that cost money to maintain. I spent 3 sleepless nights running numbers, talking to my accountant, and getting mortgage pre-approval. Frank wanted a quick sale, which worked in my favor, but I still needed to be sure I wasn't over-leveraging myself. The rental income from my current building was solid, and I had some inheritance money left, but taking on a mortgage this size was intimidating. My accountant finally told me to stop overthinking it. The numbers worked, the property was in good condition, and the opportunity wouldn't last, so I made the offer. Frank accepted. We started the process of inspections, appraisals, title work, all the usual real estate bureaucracy. The whole process took about 8 weeks to close. During this time, I learned that Karen's eviction had been delayed multiple times due to her filing appeals and requesting extensions. Richard explained that she was good at playing the system, claiming financial hardship and requesting more time. The previous eviction case based on unpaid rent had been slowly grinding through the process, but with the new evidence I'd provided about her unauthorized business activity and misrepresentation, they'd filed additional lease violations that made her delaying tactics less effective. Frank had been dealing with these delays for months and seemed relieved when my offer came through. I kept paying Karen her monthly $75 during this period, knowing it wouldn't be for much longer. Each time I handed her the cash, I had to suppress a smile. She had no idea what was coming. The property management system showed her account was still active, so I wasn't sure exactly what was happening with her eviction timeline, but Richard had assured me it was moving forward. The additional violations I'd helped document had strengthened their case considerably. Finally, the sale closed in early June. I now owned both buildings, 21 units total, 20 occupied units plus my own. Frank seemed genuinely happy to be done with it all. He shook my hand, wished me luck, and said he was moving to Florida to be closer to his daughter. The first thing I did was sit down with Richard and make sure he knew I wanted to keep him on. He was professional, he'd been helpful throughout this whole process, and he knew the building inside and out. He seemed relieved and grateful. Then I asked him about Karen's status. Her eviction was scheduled for the following week. The multiple lease violations combined with months of unpaid rent had finally caught up with her. The judge had denied her latest request for an extension, and she had 7 days to vacate. I decided to wait. I didn't want to reveal my identity until the perfect moment. That moment came on a Thursday afternoon. I was checking my mail in my building when I saw Karen walking toward me from the parking lot. She looked stressed and tired, definitely not her usual put-together self. She was carrying a large box and looked like she'd been crying. She actually had the nerve to approach me and complain about her situation. She said her landlord was being unreasonable, that she was being forced out of her home over a temporary financial setback. She was looking for sympathy, maybe even expected me to commiserate as a fellow tenant facing the cruelty of landlords. I let her talk for a minute, nodding along. Then I said, "That's rough. I know what it's like to have money problems, but hey, didn't you make some extra cash from those pool fees you were collecting? Maybe you could use that to catch up on rent." She looked confused, like she was trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic or genuine. "Pool fees? Yeah, you know, the $75 a month you've been charging people from my building, including me. Remember? You gave me a receipt and everything." The confusion on her face shifted rapidly through several emotions. Realization, then panic, then a desperate attempt to play dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken of the receipt she'd given me. This receipt. The one where you claim to have authorization from building management to collect fees for pool access. Funny thing about that. The color drained from her face. She knew what was coming. "I'm the owner of the building you've been stealing from. Those are my tenants you scammed." I let that sink in for a second, then added, "Oh, and I just bought your complex too. So I'm also the landlord you think is being so unreasonable. Small world, right?" She just stood there, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The box she'd been carrying slipped from her hands and hit the ground. I heard something inside break. "How?" she finally managed to say. "How did I find out? You approached me, remember? You demanded I pay you for pool access. So I did my homework, discovered you'd been running this scam on my tenants, and reported it to your management, who, by the way, I now employ since I bought your building." I kept my voice level and calm, which seemed to unsettle her even more than if I'd been angry. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to be out of your unit by the deadline that was given to you. You're not going to request any more extensions or file any more appeals, and you're going to be grateful that I'm not pursuing criminal charges for fraud." "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I have rights. I'll sue you for harassment for what? Buying a building? Reporting fraud? Feel free to get a lawyer." I picked up the box she'd dropped and handed it back to her. "But I'd suggest you spend your money on finding a new place to live instead. You've got less than a week." She looked like she wanted to say something else, but instead she just grabbed the box and walked away. Her hands were shaking so badly I thought she might drop it again. Later that afternoon, I had my property manager send a notice to all my tenants explaining that the pool fee arrangement some of them had been participating in was fraudulent and unauthorized. I explained that I'd discovered the scam, reported it to the appropriate authorities, and that anyone who wanted documentation for small claims court against Karen could contact the management office. I also let them know that I'd be working on potentially negotiating an actual legitimate arrangement with the neighboring building for pool access in the future, though I couldn't make any promises. I also filed a police report documenting the fraud, though I knew they were unlikely to pursue criminal charges for what amounted to a civil matter with relatively small per-person amounts. However, having the police report on file served two purposes. It created an official record in case she tried this elsewhere, and it gave my former tenants documentation they could use if they wanted to pursue small claims court cases against her. A few of them did, though I don't know if they ever collected anything. Karen moved out 3 days before her deadline. I did not see her leave, but Richard confirmed she turned in her keys and the unit was empty. Empty is a generous word, actually. She left the place a mess. We had to hire a cleaning crew, replace the carpet, repaint, and haul away a bunch of abandoned junk. Those costs were added to what she already owed. After she was gone, Richard told me a few things that explained Karen's behavior, though they did not excuse it. Apparently, she had been struggling financially for a while and had a serious gambling problem. Several tenants had seen her at a casino about 40 minutes away. That explained where the money had been going, but it did not change what she had done. She was not just a desperate person borrowing a little cash to get by. She was running a con, fake receipts, official sounding language, unauthorized pool access, cash payments, all of it. And the only reason it finally unraveled was because she got greedy enough to approach me. If she had left me alone, I might never have investigated the pool arrangement. I might never have called her management company. I might never have learned her building was for sale at exactly the right time. But she wanted $75, so I paid it, got the receipt, followed the paper trail, and ended up owning the building she was being evicted from. Funny how that works. I filed a police report documenting the scam, mostly to create an official record and give my tenants something they could use if they wanted to pursue small claims court. A few did. I do not know if they ever collected anything, but at least they had documentation. 6 months later, I owned both buildings. I kept Richard as the property manager because he knows the place inside and out, and he has been great. The unit Karen left behind is rented to a graduate student now. Quiet, pays on time, uses the pool occasionally, and has no idea about the chaos that happened before she moved in. I also negotiated a legitimate pool and gym access arrangement between the two buildings. Not cash in an envelope, not fake receipts, not just act like you belong. It is written into the lease as an optional add-on. $25 a month, properly documented, paid through management. Everyone is happy with it, and it has actually become a nice little selling point when units open up. I still live in my original apartment, and I still have not told most tenants that I own the building. Some have figured it out because news travels fast in apartment complexes, but most people still treat me like just another resident. Honestly, I like it that way. I get to see how things really operate, and tenants tell me things they might not report if they thought they were talking to the owner. Every now and then I walk past the pool and smile, thinking about how Karen demanding $75 from me somehow ended with me owning the entire complex. I have considered putting up a small plaque with some fake inspirational quote about karma, but that might be going too far. Then again, I am the landlord now. I can do whatever I want. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I just got home from this experience and I wanted to share. As a hobby, I have gotten into trading card games, specifically Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. I am not collecting sealed products. Instead, I usually buy bulk cards so I can make multiple decks and play with my family. This is important because I often make large bulk orders that consist of 50 cards or more. There are a few shops near me, and I'm lucky enough to live close to about 5 hobby shops that sell Pokemon and Magic singles. I managed to get my family into the Pokemon trading card game roughly a year ago. Since then, the ordering process at one shop has usually been simple. I would select cards from their online stock and check out with the cart. At checkout, there were 2 options, pay in advance or pay in store. Paying in advance makes sense in theory, but it has often led to problems. Sometimes a card would be listed as in stock when it actually was not. That meant I had already paid for something they could not fulfill, and then I had to wait 2 or 3 days for the refund to process. It was especially inconvenient when I needed that money back. I personally had this happen with a $10 card that needed to be refunded. So I spoke to one of the staff members and he told me, when you have big orders, it is perfectly fine to call ahead of time and we can pick the order when we have time. In fact, as long as you do not abuse the process, it works out for everyone. That staff member was awesome, and for about a year, that was exactly what I did. This process accomplished 3 things. First, I was not paying for a product they could not fulfill. Second, it reduced my waiting time because I would call 4 to 5 hours in advance. Third, the staff had plenty of time to pull the order. I never abused this process, and I always showed up when I said I would. Now, this would not be malicious compliance without the next part. About 2 months ago, my family and I got into Magic: The Gathering because Commander is a blast. That caused me to start collecting cards again and building decks for myself and my family. So I was back into the swing of things, making 50-plus single-card orders from this shop that I really liked. During my usual phone call, about 4 hours in advance, I was told, hey, you have to stop calling in these orders. It is store policy to only pull orders that have been paid for. We will not be pulling your cards until they are paid for. That was strange because I had been told otherwise, but I figured I would ask about it when I got there. When I arrived to pick up and pay for my order, I tried to explain that this process was something a previous staff member had told me was completely fine and even encouraged. There were 2 staff members there and they both responded with the same terse message. It is store policy. The message itself was fine enough, but their tone and rudeness honestly surprised me. They told me that from now on I needed to prepay for all of my orders and then come pick them up. So that is where the malicious compliance began. They made it clear what they wanted me to do, prepay and show up. So a few weeks later, I scrolled through their inventory and started the blingification of my decks. I spent roughly 40 minutes going through their online stock and adding various hollow foil basic land cards to my cart, all under $1. For anyone unfamiliar, basic lands are usually pretty cheap, often around 10 to 60 cents each. They are also categorized by set and individual printing. That means each basic land has its own set and foil print version, so the staff would need to find each land by both set and foil type. I ended up carting roughly 100 cards. That meant they would need to hunt through at least 40 different sets and specifically find only the foil versions of those basic lands. Even better, I gave them 1 hour to pick the order. 1 hour is not a lot of time, but it should have been enough for this order if their system worked the way they wanted it to. When I got there, one of the 2 guys who had reinforced the new ordering method was working. Even better, he was swamped. He had not even started my order. I would have loved to give him the 4 or 5 hours I normally gave them, but it was store policy that I stop calling in advance and instead order, pay, and show up, so I waited. I asked if they had started my order, and he quickly replied, yes, I am getting to it. I think even he knew this would have been much easier if I had called 4 hours in advance like I normally did. This may sound strange, but I was actually happy that 4 cards were not available for the order. That meant I had paid for 4 cards that they could not fulfill, which was exactly the issue the old system had avoided. Then the awesome staff member from before showed up about 30 minutes into my wait. He asked if I had been waiting long, and I told him it had been about 30 minutes. Because of the wait, he gave me one of the tournament participant packs, and I actually pulled a $30 card, Roaming Throne. In the end, I waited 40 minutes. 4 cards were missing. The exchange was finally completed. I plan on contacting their social media page or the shop owner to ask for clarification on what customers are supposed to do going forward. I will handle that soon, but for now I feel pretty vindicated. The staff member had to frantically hunt for the cards, and he still had to tell me that some were missing. Those were exactly the problems the previous system had avoided. The next one is an entitled people story. I am 31 and I have a 28-year-old sister who has honestly been the golden child to my mother for as long as I can remember, though not to my father. My parents divorced when I was a teenager because my mother cheated with an old high school boyfriend. She has always been controlling, manipulative, and narcissistic. Sadly, my sister became like her little mini-me. Our mother also seemed to believe she had total authority over me anytime she snapped her fingers. She would literally snap at me and order me around like a dog. It was demeaning, and my sister always backed her up. So it was no surprise that after our parents split, I went to live with my dad full-time while my sister stayed with our mom. The 2 of them were very alike. They also pretty much stopped speaking to my father unless it involved money. I am much more like my dad. He was very business-oriented and started teaching me his line of work when I was 16. I got pretty good at it, and after 12 years of working for him, I was made a partner in his company. Things were going great. Then, about 8 months ago, tragedy struck. My father had become somewhat immunocompromised because he had been a heavy smoker for much of his life, and he passed away at only 60 after catching COVID. I saw my mother and sister for the first time in years after we held a socially distanced funeral for my father over video call. My father had requested to be cremated and buried in a local cemetery, so there was no body or casket. My sister seemed to grieve, but my mother looked indifferent the entire time. Honestly, I was not surprised. The last time she had seen my father, she had screamed at him that he owed her more money and threatened to sue him. He just laughed at her. He had paid alimony and child support for as long as he was legally required to, and no longer than that. He had also put $30,000 toward my sister's college fund. But 10 years after the divorce, he was no longer legally required to send my mother money because of the judge's ruling, and my mother is by no means broke. She has worked the same job for nearly 3 decades, fully owns the old family home we used to live in, and regularly rents out 2 rooms in it through Airbnb. She is not hurting for money. Sometime after the funeral, my dad's will was read. Apparently, he had figured that if his heavy smoking did not eventually do him in, something else would. He even joked about it in a pre-recorded video. I was left nearly all of his assets, including most of his money, his business, and his home. My sister was left a 2015 Nissan Altima and about $10,000 in cash. My mother only received $1,000, and a few items she had been claiming were rightfully hers since the divorce. Beyond that, I inherited the rest. My girlfriend now lives with me in the house my father left to me. My sister went from finishing 2 years of community college to living off her boyfriend while only working part-time online for several years. During that time, she got pregnant but suffered a traumatic miscarriage. I did not know about it until after the funeral because we were practically no contact and no one else told me. When lockdown happened, her boyfriend's job started downsizing little by little, and eventually he was only able to stay on part-time. Their finances suffered, and he finally started telling her she needed to look for better employment as well, since he was trying to find a second job. Then she got pregnant again. She claims she and her boyfriend were careful, but she calls this her miracle baby. One evening, I got an unexpected knock at my door. When I answered, I was unpleasantly greeted by both my mother and sister. They walked right in without asking and made themselves comfortable in my living room. My girlfriend and I exchanged a confused look, and I asked why they were there. My sister was giggling, looking around, opening doors, and basically giving herself a tour of my home. My mother sat down on my sofa, snapped her fingers, and demanded a cold bottle of water. My girlfriend got one for her, and I asked again what they were there for. My sister just kept wandering around the house, ignoring me. Before long, I heard her yell from down the hall, "Mommy, it is perfect!" Yes, she still calls her mommy. My mother finally spoke up and said, "Well, I think it is time you did your brotherly duty." I said, "What?" She said, "Now that your father has passed, this house should have gone to me since I was his only spouse, but you can still fix this. You make plenty of money and could just buy a new house. Your sister needs this one so much more since she has a baby on the way. But if you are so determined to stay, you could just keep to one room and cover all the bills until you decide to move out." My girlfriend and I have read enough Reddit stories to know exactly where this was going and how it would play out if I allowed it to continue. I guess you could say we were mentally prepared. I took a deep breath and said, "That is not happening. You do not order me around, especially not in my own home. Yes, I make good money, but like Dad, I'm going to save it for when I actually need it. Not that you care." My mother started snapping her fingers at me like she used to and said, "Stop! I am your mother, and you will do as I say because I brought you into this world. I am the one in charge here, and as far as you are concerned, I am God. That means when I say jump, you ask how high. This house is rightfully mine, and your sister will live here. Consider this your formal eviction, but because I am gracious, I will give you 2 weeks to pack your bags and transfer the deed to me." In the back of my mind, I was thinking, this cannot be real. Then I grabbed my phone and started dialing. My mother quickly stood up and yelled, "What are you doing?" I said, "I am doing what I should have done as soon as this started. I am calling the police to get you out of my house." She started swiping at me and managed to knock my phone out of my hand. Then she tried to stomp on it, but I snatched it up before she could. I told her, "That is it. If you do not leave, I will force you out myself." Then my mother slapped me across the face. I returned the favor with a backhanded slap hard enough to knock her back onto the couch. She held her hand to her reddening, smeared makeup-covered face in total shock and yelled, "How dare you!" I went back to dialing and told her that if she did not leave, I would have the police remove her by force. My sister came rushing between us with her arms out, saying I should just do the right thing for once in my life and be a good big brother. I snapped and said, "Oh, really? I am the bad sibling? Last I checked, I am the one who has worked for a living since I was a teenager. I had to do all the chores in the house while you sat around playing video games or talking with your friends all day. You used to steal my hard-earned money so you could go shopping after spending all your allowance. You are a complete mooch and a thief, so I do not owe you anything. Now both of you get out before I finish dialing." My sister started crying like a child and said, "Mommy, make him stop." My mother started hugging her and kissing her cheeks while glaring at me. Then she seemed to think she had come up with something clever and said, "You know, if you call the police, I can just tell them that you hit me, and who knows, I could maybe tell everyone you wanted to do a lot worse to a poor pregnant girl in need. I do not think that would be very good for your—" I cut her off, raised my hand, and said, "Stop. If you have not noticed, my girlfriend has had her phone out recording almost this entire time. That means we have recorded evidence of you assaulting me first and openly stating that you would lie to the police. I do not think that would be very good for your reputation at work or for your Airbnb. If looks could kill, my mother would have blown me up like a tactical nuke." But she quickly deflated and started dragging my crying sister out by the arm. My sister, somehow acting like a complete toddler, broke loose from our mother's grip, sat down on my porch step, and threw a tantrum. I looked at my mother and said, "Do you see this now? This is the result of the spoiled way you raised her." My mother glared at me again, and I was treated to the sight of her trying to drag my sister off my porch steps while my sister clung to the handrails and kept repeating, "You promised me," over and over again. I laughed and told them both from the doorway to never come back. My mother flipped me off and then went back to trying to drag my sister off the porch. It took a few minutes, but she finally got my sister to stand up and leave by saying that I was a cruel, heartless bastard who would go to hell for this. I laughed again and said there was also a special place in hell for liars and narcissists who try to manipulate people to get their way. My mother clenched her fists and looked like she was about to say more, so I held up my phone again while it was recording and said, "The clock is ticking, Mom. Get off my property." She walked my sister to the car, gave me one last snooty look, and drove away. I thought that was the end of it, but letting things go was never something my mother did. After a few days, I started getting messages from people I knew and some relatives online. A lot of them were furious with me. Others had questions about what was going on. I tried to check Facebook, but I could not see what they were saying because both my mother and sister had blocked me. However, my girlfriend could still see everything because their profiles were public. We took screenshots of everything and printed some of it out. Both of their profiles had posts calling me a greedy, heartless bastard who had stolen the house that was meant to be my sister's inheritance by paying off the lawyer who handled my dad's will. That was a complete lie, and they both knew it. I called my lawyer, who had also been my father's lawyer and a trusted family friend. I gave him copies of the Facebook screenshots and the video my girlfriend had recorded the day my mother demanded my house. He wanted to send a formal cease and desist letter, but I wanted to take it further. He sent them a letter I told him to write by express mail, which had to be signed for, so I know they received it. My mother called me in an absolute fury the same day the letter was delivered. I told her that if she and my sister did not retract all the false social media posts and tell the truth, I would send all the information I had to the entire family, her boss, and upload the videos online. Then I would sue her on top of it. She called me unreasonable and said she had only done what she did for my sister's sake. Then she went into a full lecture repeating her belief that my sister still needed my house more than I did. I bluntly said I did not care what she thought. If she did not retract everything and tell the truth, I would make sure her career was over. She finally said, "Fine, you win. Have it your way and keep the house," then hung up. That evening, all of the lying posts disappeared from both their profiles. I was unblocked, and my mother gave me and everyone else a half-hearted apology. She claimed she had jumped the gun because she thought my sister needed the house more than I did since she was broke and pregnant. But she admitted that the house was rightfully mine according to my father's will, and that she knew this even before my father passed away, so she had no right to try to claim it. My sister also apologized, but she mostly just repeated what our mother said while claiming she had gone along with our mother's ideas. Then she blamed her behavior on our mother and her pregnancy hormones. The replies poured in on both of their profiles for a while. Many people were furious with them for trying to take my house. I received a lot of sorry and my bad messages from people who had previously believed them. But all it really did was show me who had been on their side from the beginning because they had believed her nonsense so quickly. Most of them were from my mother's side of the family anyway. No one on my father's side believed her at all, and they said so openly. My sister and her boyfriend ended up moving in with our mother to save money. But my mother put them in the basement so she could keep running her Airbnb. My sister started crying on social media that she could not live upstairs. I am pretty sure the two of them were fighting with each other because after that all my sister did was complain online and my mother barely posted anything anymore after the stunt she had pulled. And for those of you who made it this far, this is not the end of the story. Stay tuned for the rest soon. Anyway, thank you for watching.